How's it going, church family? I'm continuing in this devotional series right now through the book of Leviticus. Just taking a few minutes here just to take some snapshots about what Leviticus concerns. If we remember from the last devotional, Leviticus chapter 1 dealt with the offerings that you give the Lord must be a soothing aroma unto the Lord. In other words, your sacrifice to God must be something that's pleasing in His sight. We also dealt with the fact that Leviticus is all about how one should properly approach God's throne, and at a macro level, it also deals with how one should continue to live for God. So here we are just in this basic structure to Leviticus, and I want to point some more things out to you that you might be able to see in Leviticus chapter 2 and Leviticus chapter 3. Anytime you're reading a book like Leviticus, repetition is your friend. Repetition provides these markers for you to identify the main ideas and the concepts that's supposed to be written. And by the way, Leviticus was read out loud almost as a speech. So if this is a speech, there are certain verbal markers that the listening audience is supposed to hear so that they understand at a basic level as well. Repetition was their friend in listening. Repetition is our friend in hearing. So first, I just want to start with chapter 2. As you know, and as I said in the last video, chapters 1, 2, and 3 are all voluntary sacrifices. In other words, there's only two different things that you can say to God as you're bringing Him a sacrifice. Number one, you can say thank you. And number two, you can say, I'm sorry. Well, all voluntary sacrifices do is it's another way of saying thank you. And if it's a mandatory sacrifice, it's something that's necessary, something that you must do. It's more than just what's expected. If it's a necessary offering, then you'd be saying, Lord, I'm sorry, right? So here we are in chapter 2. We're just going to survey chapter 2 and chapter 3 in the next couple minutes. And I'm just going to take an example passage from each chapter so that you see what it's about. So starting in Leviticus chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, I want you to see this. Now, when anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. He shall then bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests, and shall take from it his handful of its fine flour and of its oil with all of its frankincense. And the priest shall offer it up in smoke as its memorial portion on the altar, an offering by fire, here it is again, of a soothing aroma to the Lord. The remainder of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons, a thing most holy of the offerings to the Lord by fire. So structurally speaking, when you're reading Leviticus, you have to notice when a sacrifice comes before it speaks of a priest, or when it speaks of the priest first, and then it speaks of the sacrifice. Here, when it comes to a voluntary sacrifice, you're still looking at the sacrifice being what's most important from the giver as it pertains to his fellowship with God. And then, of course, the priests play a part in that. Here's what I find interesting in verses 1 through 3 is that this sacrifice goes uncooked. But then if you get through the rest of the chapter, any of these other grain offerings, they go cooked, or you could say they go roasted. Something else that you should see in this chapter, verses 11 through 13, says, No grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall not offer up in smoke any leaven or any honey as an offering by fire to the Lord. As an offering of first fruits you shall bring them to the Lord, but they shall not ascend for a soothing aroma on the altar. Every grain offering of yours, moreover, you shall season with salt, so that the salt of the covenant of your God shall not be lacking from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. So here we've got the concept of leaven, which is a symbol for sin in the New Testament, possibly even in the Old Testament. We also have this picture of salt where Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, in the Sermon on the Mount. So we know that these sacrifices are to be preserved and set apart. They're not just to be given unto the Lord without effort, but they're to be a preserved sacrifice just for Him. We see this idea, there's a prohibition. Honey is not allowed in this sacrifice. In other words, it's got to be the purest sacrifice that you can give as it pertains to a grain offering. We have to remember these laws seem a bit peculiar for us, maybe a bit odd for us in today's culture. But in this culture, it was like God was saying, I want you to separate yourself from every possible way of life that the pagans lived with. And instead, I want you to live a new way of life. Or maybe this seems meticulous, but God is bifurcating, God is separating, God is saying this is unholy, this is holy. God is giving the Israelites a special way to encounter His throne alone. You cannot worship this God like you worship the gods in Egypt. You cannot worship this God by doing random or spontaneous acts of worship that symbolized how you worshiped other gods. If you're going to worship this God, you've got to worship him as he's set apart. And the Jewish people would have understood this. Chapter 2, these grain offerings, by the way, it's really a way to say, Lord, thank you that you're good and you constantly bring us provision. Now, if we move on to chapter 3, I want you to see something as well, just towards the end of the chapter. Chapter 3 follows the structure of there being an if-then conditional statements. If you read chapter 3, you'll constantly see if-then, or if this, then he shall do this. There's constant conditions found in chapter 3 as it pertains to peace offerings. And a peace offering was, again, a voluntary act of worship which showed thanksgiving and fellowship with the Lord. And in other parts of Scripture, if we look into chapter 7, it tells us there's a community meal after these offerings are made, which is kind of like, our Thanksgiving. So this is all about fellowship and worship to the Lord. Look in chapter 3, verses 12 through 17. It says, Moreover, if his offering is a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand on its head and slay it before the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle its blood around on the altar. From it he shall present his offering as an offering by fire to the Lord, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them, which is on the loins, and the lobe of the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. All of these particulars are given over and over and over again in chapter 3. So it's, again, the specific conditions to bring your proper sacrifice. But then 16 and 17 end with a summary statement. It says, The priest shall offer them up in smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire for a soothing aroma. There's that marker again. And then the last part of the verse says, All fat is the Lord's. You are not to eat any of this fat. In other words, you are to set this aside. All of it belongs to the Lord. All of this is about making distinctions. All of it is about separation. All of it is about saying, God, I give unto you what doesn't belong to me. In verse 17, it is a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwellings. You shall not eat any fat or any blood. At the end of the day, the Lord is saying, I want you to be my holy people. And in everything you must do, there must be a voluntary act of thankfulness, and there must be a voluntary willing to separate yourself from the cultures around you. In other words, not to be conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your minds. This concept of being a living sacrifice unto the Lord, as we see in Romans chapter 12, all came from the book of Leviticus. Now, I know this is just a micro picture, but we'll pick up more in the next coming devotionals as it pertains to the book of Leviticus. Right now, this is God's way of saying, if you want to be in fellowship with me and bring me a voluntary offering out of thankfulness from your heart, this is how you do it. All right, God bless church family. Talk to you later.